Hello, I've got 5 interesting news bits lined up for you today. Before I introduce the first one to you, let me ask you a question. Have you wondered why injections are so painful, yet we barely even feel a mosquito bite? This is something that's bugged researchers, and so they've studied how a mosquito bites us to figure out whether we can make injections less painful. So after taking a look at this, let's turn our heads to a new drug that uses our cells' defenses to kick cancer to the curb. After that, let's talk about climate change and our water woes. First, we'll see how global warming might be affecting our economy. Then, we'll see if rural water can help quench our city's thirst. And finally, let's find out how the Indian Meteorological Department predicted near normal monsoon rains for 2019. I'm Annie, and this is Research Bytes, your dose of science news. One of the scariest things about the doctor's office is the needle prick. That really hurts, but you barely notice a mosquito pierce your skin. Scientists suggest that this may be because a mosquito soars through the skin with the back and forth motion of its proboscis, while the needle is pierced forward with a lot of force. I spoke to Professor Animangsu Ghatak from IIT Kanpur. He studies the mechanics of soft solids, and this is what he had to say about how a mosquito punctures the skin.
It has got actually 2 needles, that go inside the skin. And so we initially investigated that, and while doing that we learned that mosquito also employs vibration. So then the question was that why my mosquito has to apply vibration. So we are not biologists, we are engineers. So we used the principle, we simulated the principle in our kind of experiments, fracture experiments, and tried to examine what may be going on when mosquito is inserting its own proboscis and with a similar kind of condition.
The pain we experience during an injection depends on the force needed to overcome the resistance of our skin. The greater this resistance, the higher is the pain.
When we insert a needle, then there are cracks which propagate. And some of the cracks that propagate sideways and not exactly at the front of the needle. Those cracks take a lot of energy, and therefore you need to apply more force to insert the needle.
Scientists have developed specific shapes of needles that are inspired by a mosquito's sting to reduce this resistance. There are injection needles that use high-frequency vibrations to reduce pain. This mechanism masks the pain by causing a distraction, but it could result in unwanted tissue damage. This is what Professor Ghatak did in his study.
We apply this vibration and some other principles of mosquito proboscis, like the 2 needles structure or multiple needle structure. What happens is that those side cracks, they get arrested. So as a result, that whatever effort that we put in inserting the needle, the most of the effort goes into creating that needle, the crack ahead of it. So as a result, we need to apply lesser amount of force, and the needle also goes in. And so this is basically the idea.
So these vibrations really help when a needle of a bigger diameter has to be used, like in the case of a blood transfusion. And this research of applying vibration to minimize fractures could be used to design and structure bullets as well. Did you know that cervical cancer is the 4th leading cause of death among women across the world? And even though there's been progress with therapies, the threat of cancer coming back and spreading is quite high. Almost 30% of treated patients die within 5 years of treatment, making cervical cancer one of the most dreaded forms of this disease. Most cancer drugs have terrible side effects, from weight loss to hair loss. And to add to this, cancer cells can revive after a certain period of time. Sometimes these treatments feel like we're taking 1 step forward but 2 steps back. Cancer cells tend to go rogue and make multiple changes in our genes. But our body has a defense mechanism against this. When the genes of some cells go haywire and there is a probability of them turning cancerous, these cells promptly commit suicide, which is also called apoptosis. But cancer cells are sneaky. They cleverly bypass apoptosis and survive. They do this by changing the very genes that regulate apoptosis. And so it's no surprise that many drugs are designed to trigger apoptosis in cancer cells and reinforce our body's vital defense system. In this study, the researchers prepared 8 compounds that were derived from an organic compound called piperazine. From the lot, one compound with a tongue twister of a name showed a strong effect against cancer cells grown in their lab. Okay, I'm gonna try and say this, but if I mess it up, please forgive me. This drug is called N3-chloro-2,3-nitrophenyl 4-oxoacetidinyl 2,4-phenyl piperazine 1-yl acetamide 5E. You know what? Let's just call it 5E for short. So what does this compound do? It attaches with a group of molecules that make it specifically seek out cancer cells, and this prevents it from harming healthy cells in the body. When the researchers used this drug against cancer cells in the lab, the cells shrank, some detached while others died, and the number of colonies of cancer cells decreased. At an advanced stage of the disease, these cancer cells move throughout the body, and this makes it almost impossible to target them as they slowly infiltrate all our essential tissues and organs. This new compound could constrain their mobility and enhance cell death. When the researchers treated cancer cells with 5E, they observed disturbances in the symmetry of the plasma membrane that surrounds the cell. They also saw changes in the shape of the nucleus and fragmentation of DNA inside the nucleus. All of these are hallmarks of apoptosis. 5E also helps activate essential enzymes called caspases. These enzymes are the shredders of the cell, and they chew up everything inside it. 5E helps move this caspases from the mitochondria into the cytoplasm. The cells can now be completely digested by apoptosis, and they cannot cause cancer anymore. But while 5E shows so much promise against cervical cancer, it's still a long way from the drugstore. Global warming and climate change have been hot topics of late. Yet, it seems like many people don't even believe that climate change is a problem. The scientific consensus is that if we do not try to deal with climate change by 2050, then we will have to deal with its devastating and irreparable side effects later. Melting glaciers, rising sea levels, and the threat to biodiversity are some of the many impacts of global warming. But the repercussions are much more multifaceted and complex than what we understand today. For one, researchers from Stanford University reveal how global warming has increased the economic inequality among different nations. This study builds on previous work that analyzed the relationship between the annual temperature and the gross domestic product, or GDP, of different countries and how temperature fluctuations impact economic growth. What they found was that this rise in global temperatures has benefited cold countries like Sweden and Norway, but this same increase has hurt economic growth in warmer countries like India and Nigeria by impacting their productivity and health. The argument is that global warming has resulted in a condition where rich countries get richer while the poor ones get poorer. In India, climate change has caused a 31% lower per capita GDP growth compared to if global warming did not happen. Other countries that are burdened by warming include Sudan, Nigeria, Indonesia, and Brazil. A wealthier country is responsible for more greenhouse gas emissions. But across the world, 18 countries with relatively lower per capita carbon dioxide emissions suffered from negative economic impacts, whereas 74% of the countries with higher carbon dioxide emissions have benefited from global warming. The findings of this study could help politicians develop policies to address this problem and ensure that the poorer countries are not severely affected by climate change. A water shortage in an urban area is a perennial problem. Trust me, I know. I live in Bengaluru, and our city might reach critical water levels just like Cape Town in Africa did in less than a year. About 400 million people struggle with the lack of water in urban areas, and this problem is just going to multiply because the demand for urban water is expected to increase up to 80% by 2050. A solution to this problem could be to transfer water from rural areas to our cities. But what are the implications of siphoning off water from a rural area for the benefit of the urban? A study that was published in the journal Environmental Research Letters investigated the prevalence of these water reallocations throughout the world. They did this in an attempt to understand its drivers, conflicts, and policy implications. Any transfer of water from rural to urban areas is often opposed because of the water lost by the rural community. And on the other side of the coin, policymakers seem to believe that by increasing the efficiency of irrigation practices, we will always get a win-win outcome for both the rural donors and the urban recipients. This is a myth. There's limited research about the coverage and the impact of water reallocation. According to the researchers, we don't really know how shifting water resources will impact the rural settlement. This study identified 96 urban areas across the world that receive water through 103 water reallocation programs. These programs involved about 16 billion cubic meters of water per year. This is almost equal to the annual flow of the Colorado River, and this water benefits an urban population of around 383 million. The study found that most of the documented water reallocation projects are concentrated in North America and Asia. Asia had 49 projects, out of which 18 were from India. And in most cases, they used both surface water and groundwater for reallocation. A rising population and the growing demand for water were the primary drivers for about 80 reallocation projects. From the rural perspective, the limitations on water supply, its unreliability, and quality issues played a big role. In India, cities like Chennai have multiple water reallocation projects which have many donor regions. These projects receive water from both ground and surface water sources. In Hyderabad, these projects have started many rural-urban conflicts for water, while projects like the Yettinahol River diversion have raised biodiversity concerns. Reallocation can produce a wide range of outcomes, from win-win, win-lose, and lose-lose scenarios for the urban and the rural counterparts. But data is insufficient, and the researchers urge other scientists to change this as soon as possible. Southern India has been struggling with scorching heat waves for the last few months. And we've all been daydreaming about the monsoon showers that will bring some respite during the month of June. In an unlikely turn of events, strong winds have blown Tropical Storm Phony to South India's front door and brought us an early torrent of rain. Phony formed in the northern Indian Ocean over the last weekend, and it has been moving from the east-southeast side of Chennai, India to the northwest. The forecasts say that it will soon intensify to hurricane strength. While we might be a bit inundated with water at the moment, the southwest monsoon rainfall, expected to pitter-patter over the country in June, will be beneficial to farmers because it will ensure the Kharif season. The Indian Meteorological Department, or IMD for short, predicts that rainfall is expected to be about 96% of the long period average of 89 centimeters during June to September. And what is this long period average? Well, the LPA for the season is calculated on the basis of the mean rainfall during the 4-month monsoon season over a 50-year time span from 1951 to 2010. It works out on an average of 89 centimeters of rainfall for the whole country. Every year, the Indian Meteorological Department issues 2 stages of forecasts for the southwestern monsoon rains, one in April and another in June. But how do they predict the intensity of these rains? There's some interesting science involved. Weather phenomena, like the monsoon rains, are calculated using a set of algorithms and climate models that can predict future conditions based on present conditions. The Ministry of Earth Sciences in India launched the Monsoon Mission. This has 2 state-of-the-art prediction systems for short-range, medium, and extended-range seasonal forecasts. But there are a huge variety of factors across the globe that influence our Indian rains. Meteorologists have to keep a track of 5 important parameters that can dictate the fate of India's monsoons. The gradient in the sea surface temperatures between the North Atlantic and North Pacific Oceans, the sea surface temperature over the equatorial Indian Ocean, sea level pressure in East Asia, air temperature of the land surface in Northwest Europe, and the heat content over the equatorial Pacific. Studies have proposed using indicators which could be included in forecasting models and other different ways of eliminating biases to make these predictions more accurate. So all these parameters need to be taken into account while forecasting India's weather. There's one more major factor that comes into play, and it's the El Nino. El Nino is a climate pattern that describes the unusual warming of surface waters in the eastern tropical Pacific Ocean. During an El Nino, the ocean temperature rise in the central and eastern tropical Pacific Ocean. This results in a change in the wind and the rainfall patterns over the Pacific. The sea surface temperature changes from time to time, and this makes it really tricky to forecast the weather. This is why the IMD makes 2 forecasts for the southwestern monsoon rains. This year, the El Nino is predicted to be neutral, but it could turn positive during the monsoon season, and this just means that it would bring good rains to India. So perhaps the saying, as unpredictable as the weather, is a thing of the past, as science and research come up with more sophisticated ways to discern just what our weather patterns actually mean. Thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Links to all my references can be found in the description below. For more science-based stories, podcasts, and news, log on to our website www.researchmatters.in.